The blessing you've been praying for isn't lost. God didn't forget you. He didn't change his mind about your future. But for longer than you realize, something has been standing between you and the breakthrough you've been asking for. Fear. Fear disguised as caution. Fear disguised as waiting for the perfect moment. Fear disguised as needing one more sign before you move. Every time God placed an opportunity in front of you, fear showed you everything that could go wrong. Every time faith whispered, "Take the step," fear whispered, "Not yet." And little by little, the life you were meant to step into kept getting postponed. Tonight, God wants you to see what fear has been stealing from you. Not just opportunities, not just peace, but confidence, growth, healing, and blessings that were waiting for your obedience, because the season of standing still is coming to an end. What God is about to reveal may change the way you see every struggle, every delay, and every closed door you've faced. So before you scroll away, listen carefully. This message may be the confirmation you've been praying for. Maybe you're tired of feeling stuck, not because you don't have dreams, not because you don't care, but because every time you think about taking the next step, 100 questions rush into your mind. What if I fail? What if I make the wrong choice? What if everything falls apart? So you stay where you are, hoping clarity will come before courage. Yet, deep down, you already know what needs to change. You feel it during those quiet moments when the house is silent and your thoughts grow loud. You feel it when you're lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the same fears over and over again. You feel it when you watch others move forward while you wonder why your life seems frozen in place. The hardest part isn't the fear itself. It's the frustration of knowing you could be further along if fear hadn't convinced you to keep waiting. You've prayed, you've asked God for direction, you've searched for signs. But sometimes what looks like confusion is actually fear wearing a different face. And that realization hurts, because deep inside, you're beginning to understand that the door may have been open longer than you thought. But hear this tonight. God has never been standing on the other side of your fear, waiting to judge you for it. He has been standing beside you the entire time, through every hesitation, through every sleepless night, through every moment you doubted yourself, through every opportunity you almost took but walked away from. He was there. There were nights when you felt completely alone, staring into the darkness, wondering why moving forward felt so difficult. You questioned your strength. You questioned your faith. Sometimes you even questioned whether God was still listening. Yet, even in those moments, he never turned away. He saw the tears nobody else saw. He heard the prayers you could barely put into words. He understood the fears you were too embarrassed to admit. The fears hidden behind your smile. The fears hidden behind your excuses. The fears hidden behind the phrase, "I'm just waiting for the right time." God knows that many of the battles you've been fighting were never visible to other people. Others saw your silence, God saw your struggle. Others saw hesitation. God saw the weight you were carrying. Others saw delays. God saw the fear that kept whispering worst-case scenarios into your mind. And even then, He remained patient with you, because God's love is not based on how brave you are. His presence is not reserved for people who never feel afraid. His mercy does not disappear when your faith feels weak. In fact, some of the people God used most powerfully in history first wrestled with fear. Fear does not shock Him. Fear does not disqualify you. Fear does not cancel His purpose for your life. And that's what you've been missing. The enemy wants you to believe that your fear has made you unworthy, that you've waited too long, that you've missed your chance, that God has moved on to someone else. But none of that is true. The same God who called you is still calling you. The same God who planted those dreams inside your heart is still watching over them. The same God who opened the door is still standing near it, even now, especially now. Because while fear has been telling you to focus on everything that could go wrong, God has been quietly preparing everything that can go right. You may not see it yet. You may not feel ready yet. But God's presence has never left your side, not for a single day, not for a single moment. And as you listen right now, something is beginning to shift. Not because your circumstances have suddenly changed, but because you're starting to realize that you were never meant to face this fear alone. Because the greatest battle in your life was never the obstacle in front of you. It was the argument happening inside you, the quiet war between faith and fear, a war nobody else could see. Fear has a way of sounding reasonable. It rarely shows up screaming. Instead, it whispers, "Wait a little longer. You're not ready. What if you fail? What if people judge you? What if everything falls apart?" And the longer you listen, the more convincing those voices become. What began as caution slowly becomes captivity. What began as hesitation becomes a habit. Before you know it, fear is no longer protecting you. It's controlling you. And that's exactly what makes this battle so dangerous. Because fear doesn't always stop you by closing doors. Sometimes it stops you by convincing you never to walk through them. Think about how many times you've felt God nudging your heart. How many times you've sensed a new beginning, a conversation you needed to have, a decision you needed to make, a step you knew you should take, yet something inside kept pulling you backward, not because you lacked potential, not because you lacked intelligence, not because God hadn't prepared a way, but because fear kept magnifying every possible risk. Fear made giants out of shadows. Fear turned questions into walls. Fear convinced you that safety was better than growth. But here's what fear never tells you: the cost of staying where you are. The opportunities missed, the confidence lost. The prayers left unanswered because action never followed faith. The future delayed by one more day of waiting, one more week, one more year. And that's not the part nobody told you. Every blessing God prepares often requires a step of trust before you can see the outcome, not after. before. That's why fear fights so hard, because fear understands something many people forget. Once you take the first step, its power begins to weaken. Once you move, fear loses its grip. Once you trust God enough to leave the familiar, you start discovering what He has been preparing all along. The enemy never needed to destroy your purpose. He only needed to convince you to postpone it, to keep waiting, to keep doubting, to keep second-guessing yourself, to keep believing that tomorrow would be a better time. But tomorrow became months, months became years, and deep inside, you started wondering why nothing seemed to change. Here's what you've been missing. The battle was never about your ability. It was about your agreement. Would you agree with fear, or would you agree with God's promise? Because the voice you believe eventually becomes the direction you follow. And tonight, that choice is standing in front of you once again, not as pressure, not as condemnation, but as an invitation to stop letting fear write the next chapter of your story. But something is changing. Maybe not around you yet, maybe not in a way others can see, but something is changing inside you. For the first time in a long time, you're beginning to realize that fear doesn't deserve the authority you've given it. The future you've been praying for will never be reached by standing still. And deep down, you know that. You didn't come this far just to remain trapped by the same fears that have followed you for years. God is not asking you to have all the answers. He is not asking you to see the entire path. He is simply asking you to trust Him with the next step, one act of faith, one decision to move forward instead of backward. And this changes everything, because breakthrough rarely begins with a miracle everyone can see. Often, it begins with a quiet decision inside the heart, a decision that says, I will no longer let fear decide who I become. The moment you make that choice, fear starts losing ground, and faith starts finding its voice again. What once felt impossible begins to feel possible, not because you're stronger, but because you're finally remembering who walks beside you, because fear has lied to you for far too long. It told you that you weren't ready. It told you that you weren't capable. It told you that other people were more qualified, more gifted, and more deserving. But God never created you to live beneath the weight of those lies. You were not created to spend your life hiding from every challenge. You were not created to remain trapped by doubt. You were not created to watch your purpose from a distance. You were created with intention, with value, with a purpose that still exists even after every setback you've faced. And here's what fear doesn't want you to remember. You are not defined by your mistakes. You are not defined by your delays. You are not defined by the opportunities you missed. God sees something greater when He looks at you. He sees potential. He sees growth. He sees strength that you haven't fully discovered yet. The calling on your life was never canceled by fear. The dream was never removed. The purpose was never forgotten. And tonight, God is reminding you of who you truly are, not someone destined to stay stuck, but someone chosen to move forward, someone loved enough to be called higher, someone capable of becoming far more than fear ever allowed them to believe. Imagine what begins to happen when fear is no longer in control. The energy once spent worrying becomes energy used for moving forward. The nights once filled with anxiety become filled with peace. The doors that seemed impossible to reach suddenly feel within walking distance, not because life becomes perfect, but because you stop allowing fear to make every decision. This is where breakthrough begins, not when every obstacle disappears, but when your trust in God becomes greater than your fear of the unknown. And I believe that's what is happening right now. A new confidence is rising inside you, a quiet courage, a willingness to take the step you've been avoiding, the healing you've been praying for, the opportunity you've been waiting on, the growth you've been longing to see. They may be closer than you think, because God has never been preparing you for a life of limitation. He has been preparing you for freedom, for growth, for purpose, for a future that fear could never fully imagine. And as you move forward in faith, you'll begin to discover something beautiful. The blessing was never as far away as it seemed. Fear simply made the journey look impossible. But now, you're starting to see it differently, and that changes everything. So tonight, release the fear you've carried for far too long. You were never meant to live imprisoned by what might happen. God is with you. He is guiding your steps, strengthening your heart, and preparing the path ahead. May peace replace your anxiety. May courage rise where fear once lived. May every delay become a testimony of God's timing. And as you move forward in faith, may you discover that the blessing you've been seeking was closer than you ever imagined. You are not alone, and your breakthrough is not over.